Let's start with some introductions. My name is E-UNI. I used to be part of EVE University. I joined at the beginning of January and left in July. So 6 months in the uni, and well, now I'm in a PvE stroke anti-pirate alliance. We go out on low-sec roams every so often, so I've got a little tiny bit of PvP experience under my belt. I did a little bit in the uni as well. Most of my training, however, is in PvE and especially Caldari. So you'll have to excuse me if I spend a little bit more time on the Caldari stuff and not on the other ships. Firstly, why Battlecruisers? I mean, why am I giving a class on Battlecruisers? Well, they are really common ships in PvP and in PvE, but mostly in PvP. They're very common ships. They've got a very good number of weapon slots, so they can do a lot of damage, but they are smaller than a battleship, so they're a lot more maneuverable, they're faster, they're easier to get around. They're my favourite ship class in the game. They're versatile, you can use them for just about anything. Everything that you can do with a battlecruiser can be done by other ships, possibly a lot better, but you can't do everything you can do in a battlecruiser in another ship. Okay, let's start by talking about the strengths of the battlecruiser class. Can anybody name for me several strengths that you can think of that battlecruisers have? Garrus mentions tank, Calzar mentions damage, Salaman mentions loss of medium guns, Alcius mentions cheap, Mike says range in a Drake. Give me a second, I need to scroll up. Kadon says lots of shield extenders, a few people say high slots, Bright Eyes 888 says nice insurance payouts. Did you get your name from an online casino site, by the way? All of those are valid. They're very good points, all of them. There are a few others that a lot of you haven't thought of. Oh, hang on. Sophia says benefits from rigs more so than smaller ship classes. Tigi mentions warfare links. I will get around to those eventually. Poxon says low skill compared to battleships. And Salaman says quick to train. Let's put that in perspective. If you just roll a new character, say a Minmatar guy. Let's say you roll a Minmatar guy. You can get that Minmatar character into a Hurricane hull in under 5 days. That's not accounting for anything like implants or anything. Let's assume you're not training cybernetics at all. You're just going straight for battlecruisers. You can get into a Hurricane inside of 5 days. To get a fully T2 fitted Hurricane or Cyclone or any other battlecruiser, you can do it in under 2 months. So in the grand scheme of things, they are very quick to train. You can get into them very quickly. You can go around cruising around the galaxy in very little time at all. I think I did a T2 fitted Cyclone in about 49 days, but don't quote me on that. Yes, Zeno says accept the Merm with drone skills. Yeah. What else have we got down? Versatility and viability for both PvE and PvP. What do I mean by versatility? By versatility, I mean you can do a lot of damage. You can fit a very solid tank. You could use your mid slots for E-War, your high slots for remote repping, etc., etc., etc. There are things that battlecruisers do better than other ships. For example, damage. You will not get so much damage out of, say, a Thorax. Well, okay, skills depending. Other ships do things better than battlecruisers do them. For example, let's take the remote repping thing for a second, because battlecruisers do usually come with utility high slots. Again, I'll go over those in a minute. You might want to fit a remote repper, an ET, a shield transporter. Logistics do those better, but that is not to say that you cannot do something with that utility high in a battlecruiser. What else did I get down? Getting all racial cruisers to 3 is not arduous. It's not. You can get racial cruisers to 3 in about... Let's say you want to start from the ground up with a completely new race. You've got your Minmatar character, you want to train up Galenti. That's fine. You start from the ground up with Galenti, you can get You can get Galentia Frigate 4 in about, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 days. Salamander says you need Ragewell Cruiser 4. Let me just bring up an info page for one of the two Ferox fittings we posted here. The Ferox has as its requirements, prerequisites tab, Caldari Cruiser level 3. Not 4. I can see why you'd think 4. You need 4 for battleships. So 2 days for Frigate 4. Getting Cruiser to 3 is about another 4 days. Let's say no, not 4 days. Call it another 2 or 3 or something like that. But you need Spaceship Command. Let's say you already have that. Let's say 4 days for getting a new faction's battlecruiser unlocked. Do that for every faction. You're looking at about 2.5 weeks from a completely new character. That's not a massive problem at all for anybody. 2.5 weeks is nothing. What else did I get down? Usually they have very solid tanks. Not always. Most of them do. A lot of them have utility highs. Now, I said I'd come around to this. What is a utility high? Can someone in class tell me what a utility high is? Salaman says warfare links. You can use utility highs for that, but a utility high is not inherently used for warfare links. People are saying slots where you can't fit weapons, high slots where you can't fit turrets, launchers, mining lasers. If you have a high slot that after you've fitted everything out with weapons is still empty, that is a utility high. What can you put there? Well, I mentioned it earlier. You can put in stuff for remote repping, you can put in stuff for cap war, and yes, you can put in warfare links. I'll come back to those later. I said I would, and I promise you that I will. What else is good about battlecruisers? They are smaller than battleships. They're more maneuverable than battleships. Let's say you have a battleship like a I don't know, a Tempest. Let's say you have a Tempest. Bad example, but it's the one I'm going with. It's slow. You can get fast Tempests, but in general they are pretty slow. You can move them around, and they take forever to align to something. You don't need to worry about that so much in a battlecruiser. You can whiz around doing, okay, a little bit less damage, and you have a little bit less tank on you, but you can go about 3 times as fast. Okay, what else? Good sensor strength, good lock-on ranges. This means you can target things out to about 60 kilometers or so with semi-decent skills, and if you encounter, say, a lone blackbird, he'll have a harder time jamming you because you have a fairly decent sensor strength on you. You've also usually got enough mid-slots for E-War. Most people wouldn't think of putting E-War on a battlecruiser. This is quite right, they are there to blow stuff up. But sometimes if you're fitting out, say, a Myrmidon, and most of your highs are... Okay, what would you do in a Myrmidon? Let's scrap the Myrmidon example. Let's take a Drake. You've got a lot of mid-slots taken up by your shield tank. You wouldn't suffer too much if you took out one of those mid-slots and if you took out a shield extender and put, say, a tracking disruptor or a target painter there instead. You wouldn't suffer too much from that, and you would add a lot of utility to your battlecruiser and therefore to the fleet you're flying with. The last thing I got down was, of course, warfare links. Now, what are warfare links aside from awesome? Nobody knows what warfare links are aside from awesome. Or was everybody going to say awesome? Alcia says fleet bonuses. Yes. When you activate a warfare link, well, let me go backwards. Battlecruisers are among the only ship classes that can fit warfare links. Can someone link a warfare link for me, please? It can be any one except the mining one. I'll get around to the mining ones later. Let me think. Command ships and some capitals are the only other types that can fit warfare links. When you activate a warfare link, it gives the whole level of command you're on. If you're a squad commander, then it will give your whole squad bonuses to, for example, shield resists or targeting speed. Or there's a lot of things that warfare links can give you bonuses to. They generally make you and your fleet better. Considering that most, if not all, battlecruisers can sacrifice a high slot for one of those, and let's say 60 CPU, I think that's what they cost, it's not bad. It's not bad. You can get rid of a gun, say, put a warfare link there, you lose out on a little tiny bit of DPS, the rest of your fleet suddenly becomes awesome. That's not to say that battlecruisers are completely awesome, though. I mean, they are awesome, but they're not uber awesome. Yes, I have a dog. He is barking. He is very, very barky. He's a terrier. He's quieting down now. Yeah, he is about 3. Okay, where was I? Yeah, battlecruisers do have some pretty glaring weaknesses. Can someone please give me an example of a weakness that a battlecruiser has? Michael Raychild says that they are slow. That is sometimes true. They are faster than ships that are bigger than them, most of the time. But in the grand scheme of things, with an afterburner, you're looking at about, 300 meters a second? A frigate can do that with no prop mod. Salaman says they are vulnerable to frigates. Yes, I'll get around to that in a moment. Akanai Belvar says cruiser size tank. That's not automatically true, but bigger SIG, yes. Let's take a Celestis cruiser, for example. That thing's got a SIG radius of about 130 meters. Your average Drake is looking at something around 320. So you're looking at a SIG radius that is several times bigger, I think about 2 point something times bigger, 2.7, 2.8 times bigger. Other ships are going to lock onto you faster than they would onto smaller ships, and missiles, notably, can deliver more damage. Other ships can do more damage to you as well. They have an easier time tracking you, hitting you. Drones will have an easier time doing the same. But bigger SIG radius makes you more vulnerable. Low scan resolution, thank you very much, Bruno. Low scan resolution, it infuriates me to no end when I cannot target something. I've taken a Drake out on a few low-sec anti-piracy roams before. We've had, I don't know what, cruisers warping in, and even with a sensor booster, it takes me about 5 seconds to lock onto them. That's pretty slow when I could be doing, say, 2 seconds in a frigate and slapping some ECM on them. Sullivan says the natural resist have big holes. For example, the Hurricane's shield resist for EM is 1%. Not sure where you're getting the 1%. Not sure where you're getting the 1% from, but that's more or less the same for any Tech 1 ship. They won't have the same huge resists as, say, a Hack would. But this is a symptom of all Tech 1 ships. Zeno says Caldera resists are great on battlecruisers. When I cover the Ferox and the Drake, yes, I'll mention that. I'll mention that very specifically. What else? Why is my alliance flashing? Oh, don't worry. They were just shooting the breeze. What else? Fitting issues. I can't believe nobody mentioned fitting issues. Sometimes you look at your battlecruiser, you think, okay, this has a pretty big power grid on it. It's got over 1,000 power grid. I can fit lots of stuff to it. Not always. Sometimes you fit out your ship, you fit your tank, you fit your weapons, and you find you can't fit as many weapons as you'd like, or they're not as big as you'd want them to be. This really only affects Tier 1 battlecruisers, like, well, I'll name the Tier 1 battlecruisers: the Brutix, the Cyclone, the Prophecy, LOL Prophecy, and the Ferox. The reason they had a tiering system was because those battlecruisers were introduced first. I don't know when they were introduced. I don't know when the other battlecruisers were introduced. The other ones came later. But it's a question of age. Tier 1 came first. They're easier to fly. They only need Battlecruiser 1 to get into. And in general, they have worse fitting possibilities than their bigger cousins. In a way, I suppose the Tier 2 ones were supposed to supersede them a little, but that hasn't entirely worked. What else? We've got not as sturdy down under the tank thing. I made really detailed notes, but I have to skip a lot of stuff. What else? They're unforgiving. What do I mean by unforgiving? What I mean is that they are very easy to sit in. Like you can get into a hurricane in 5 days, like I said earlier, but they're not so easy to fly really well. This is probably the first ship type that a player will encounter where this is the case. You can get into a cruiser, fine. You can maybe fly it fairly well in about a month. That's not a problem because most people won't get into cruisers for about a month anyway. The Drake is an exception to this rule. I'll get onto that later, but for the most part, if you undock a battlecruiser and you're underskilled, you've got fitting skills, you've got cap skills, gunnery skills, whatever, you'll find yourself coming home in a pod. Some of the time, most of the time. Why was I in the wrong chat channel? Okay, I'm in the right chat channel now. Drakes are a subversion of that. You can get into one fairly quickly. It treats you well almost out the box. But unlike the other battlecruiser types, they take a lot more effort to fly really, really well. Other battlecruisers, you can go from pretty crap to pretty good within the space of, I don't know, a couple months or so. Drakes require a lot more skills, and I don't mean skill points. I mean some personal skills to really get the most out of them as well. Let's just roll back up to the chat. I think Salaman said something about micro warp drives. Nope, someone else said something about micro warp drives. He said they're very difficult. Very hard to fully fit with a complete T2 set. Sorry, I've got my push-to-talk key set down to the same thing as scroll down to the bottom of the chat window. I am silly. A lot of the time, with the fitting issues thing, you will find yourself struggling to fit everything as T2. This is an especially common complaint of Drake pilots, because as much as your ship has massive CPU, that's what large shield extenders run on. And all your shield modules and all your BCUs. You run out of CPU pretty quickly, so you might end up with 7 T2 launchers, a full T2 shield tank, a full, or a full rack of BCUs or shield power reloads or whatever. But something might suffer somewhere along the way, depending on your fitting skills. I have trouble fitting everything T2 in EHQ or EFT without an all-5 profile and some implants. Let's just see here. Bruno says, Rupture recommends basic certificates, Hurricane recommends standard. This is something to think about before undocking. Just a note on certificates, they're not prerequisites. You can undock without having a certificate for something. In fact, I don't have certificates for all the things I fly. But they are guidelines, and they are there for a reason. By that, I mean, a lot of the skills they mention are skills you will want to train anyway to get the most out of your ship. I'm not saying that's universally the case, but here, it is definitely something to bear in mind. Salaman says the PG CPU per slot is small. What's that for?
If you compare the average power grid and CPU of frigate item modules to the power grid and CPU per slot, it's much more forgiving than with the battlecruiser.
That is true. I'm actually mostly thinking of weapons there. Let's take a look at a Tech 2 missile launcher. Let me get up in the market. Okay, here we go. Missile launchers, heavy launchers. Let's say we're flying a Drake. What I just linked in Fleet Chat is a heavy missile launcher 2. It needs 55 CPU. Drakes have a lot of CPU, but you need most of that for your tank. So by the time you come around to fitting 7 of those bad boys, you find yourself missing about half your CPU. By way of comparison, let's bring up a rocket launcher, and you'll find it only needs about 17 CPU. CPU doesn't scale two well-given different ship sizes. It starts off pretty high in frigates, and, well, even by the time you get into Titans, you're still only struggling with about 750. Well, okay, struggling. But the point is that, I forgot what the point is. Well, actually, let's move on before I get lost again. Just before I go on to the individual ship notes, I was going to go through each individual ship, each individual battlecruiser, separately talk about its strengths, its weaknesses, whatever. I want to give a note on E-UNI guidelines. These don't apply to me because I am ex-uni, but these apply to a lot of people in here. I'm seeing a lot of blue pluses in here, so a lot of uni pilots here. What E-UNI recommends for PvE play is a tech 2 tank. What do I mean by a tech 2 tank? I've mentioned it a couple of times already, but what do I mean by a tech 2 tank? Michael says level 2. How can I give some examples? Tanith and Xena give the best answers, so does Gareth. Tech 2 versions of the defensive modules. Salaman says a set of T2 low and medium modules. Not automatically Salaman, because low slots are also damage mods. But it seems that a lot of you have a good idea of what I'm talking about here. Uni recommends it for PvE. It's, correct me if I'm wrong, but under Rules of Engagement or Warsaw, one of those, it's more or less required to fit a T2 tank onto a battlecruiser or bigger for PvP. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I know we've got at least one manager in here. China links to Wartop. Salaman asks, would the Afterburner fall into the Tech 2 tank? No. The reason I say that is because Tech 2 Afterburners, although nice, do not provide that much of a benefit over, for example, well, they don't provide as much benefit of the meta stuff as, say, a medium repper would over a meta version of the medium repper. And in fact, some people prefer the meta Afterburner to the Tech 2 one just because of fitting reasons. They take a fair bit of power grade CPU to fit, okay, not so much CPU, but they take a bit of power grid to fit, and they also need a fair bit of cap that you could be using to run an active tank, or fire guns, or use invulnerability fields. Cassandra Blackmore rightly points out that E-UNI has some recommended battlecruiser fits for a lot of scenarios, along with the recommended skill sets for them. And Tanith points out getting to level 3s is fast for new people who in some ways are underprepared. Yes, that is also what I meant under the unforgiving thing. In PvE especially, the difficulty jump from L2 to L3 is quite high for new players. By which I mean, level 1s, you'd be lucky if you get anything bigger than a frigate. Level 2s, you might see a cruiser occasionally, most of the time they're frigates and destroyers. Level 3s, they start throwing battlecruisers at you. And most of the ships you'll be fighting will either be destroyers or tech-on cruisers. The difficulty jump is quite big. If you're not prepared for it, then you will come home in a pod. And if you're in PvP, then not only will you get ridiculed for flying a battlecruiser you weren't ready for, you might not come home at all. Michael says Evemon is your friend. This is very true. I use it all the time. Salaman, the occasional L3 might possibly scram you. They do introduce ECM, E-War even, in L3s. Most of the horrible stuff is safe for L4 and L5. What else? A couple of notes on general fitting. Tech 2 weapons. They are recommended. They are not explicitly required because, well, fitting requirements are quite harsh. Especially without advanced weapon upgrades. Who here has advanced weapon upgrades trained to at least 4? I'm getting 3X's, 5X's, 7, and a no. 8X's. It's quite intensive. To get the most out of anything big, you need that skill trained fairly high if you want the big guns, or the big launchers. The reason for that is pretty obvious. They take up fitting. That skill lowers the amount of power grid they take up, which you can use for your tank. Or even to fit the guns at all. Another thing I will mention about fitting things, rigs. They help a battlecruiser a lot. Tech 1 ships up to that point, not so much. And if, in fact, if you're fitting rigs onto a frigate, either you plan to do a lot of solo PvP or small group PvP, or you are crazy. I'm sorry, but that is just my opinion on the matter. On a battlecruiser, however, well, they can prepare you for fitting rigs onto hacks, hectors, battleships, whatever. Sorry, the dog is barking again. The thing about rigs is they boost aspects of your ship by a percentage. Yeah, my dog only seems to like my mother. Anybody else in the family, well, unless we've got food, he's not interested. Yeah, rigs improve aspects of your ship by a percentage. For example, if you've got, let me bring a rig up at Trimark, it will boost your armor HP by a certain amount. It will slow you down, admittedly, but on anything too small, that 10% or 15% or however big the percentage value is, it's not going to be very much. 10% of nothing is still nothing. 10% of, for example, 5,000, it starts to add up pretty quickly. Especially when you factor in other things like plates or resist Fury HP. These things bump up your tank by quite a lot, bump up your DPS by quite a lot, bump up other things. On anything smaller than a battlecruiser, E-UNI reckons you're not supposed to fit it. You can do it on Tech 1 cruisers nowadays, but smaller stuff than that, no. It used to be the case that you couldn't fit rigs on Tech 1 cruisers. Zeno says 60 to 70,000 DHP in a battlecruiser with rigs. Yeah, I can believe that. I've seen that. Anything battlecruiser sized or higher under E-UNI SOP, you need to fit rigs on it, just because the boosts are that good. That's during war, I think. Well, it would be if it's under SOP, wouldn't it? Okay, let's move on from the general stuff. Let's move on to the ship-specific stuff. What I will do is I will go alphabetically by faction and then by tier level. So I'll go Amar, Caldari, Galenti, Minmatar. Some people might say I'm getting rid of the worst ones and saving the best ones for last. Yes, in Rust we trust, etc., etc. No, it's just the way the alphabet works, I'm afraid. Several pairs like that for incursions, Xenia. I'd like to see one of those after class. Okay, we had Azrael's blog somewhere. It's probably up the top somewhere or lost in the chat spam. I'll bring it up again because he deals with every ship separately and specifically in a mostly PvP-centered context. Thank you, Shiner. Hang on, we're arguing about advanced weapon upgrades, opening stuff up. It doesn't matter if it does, okay? If it does or it doesn't, I would focus on it more for the power grid it saves you, rather than what it opens up. Marauders are for another time. Okay, the first ship I'd like to talk about, and by the way, I'm going to need a guy to do the links here. To some person to throw links out there. The first ship I'd like to talk about is the Tier 1 Amar Battlecruiser, the Prophecy. Why am I starting with the weakest one, the one I dislike? I don't know. That's just the way it worked. Okay. I don't actually know if Azrael was former E-UNI. I think he might have been, but anyway, that's getting a bit off topic there. The Prophecy. Take a look at it. Take a look at its info page. It's got 7 high slots, 3 mid slots, 6 low slots. When I do slot layouts, I'm going to go high, mid, low. So this thing's going to go 7, 3, 6. Just so that you know for what I'm doing for the other ones, because I've got 8 to go through, and I need a unified format. As you can see from the bonuses, it's got a 10% reduction in medium energy weapon capacity use. That's lasers, so you can be all like, I'm a firing my laser, and do a cell thing. And 5% bonus to all armor resistances per level. Why was I going to say all Amar resistances per level? Do we hate the Amar that much? Except if you hate Amar. Well, good news. Get in one of these and you will resist them more. Why am I seeing... Oh, okay. Let's say Moondancer goes boo. I can see a hood there. Clearly we have an Amar in the ranks. Okay. Someone said a bit further up, a bait ship. Yes, it can do that. It's got armor bonuses and Amar bonuses. It's got a very solid armor tank for PvP. Not necessarily so for PvE. Let's just say I found it really lackluster when I tested it in PvE. Shield tanking, by the way, is not really an option here. It's only got 3 mids. You can't fit a prop mod and a load of shield stuff in that. The reason I don't like it for PvE, the inherent resist bonuses is like having an extra energized adaptive nanomembrane on board. Those things are the passive Omni armor resist modules. You basically get one built in for free. That frees up a low slot for an extra place or an extra heatsink or whatever. But in PvE, you can generally get better results from the Harbinger, which I'll talk about next. The main problem with the Prophecy is that its armor modules all go in low slots. So your reppers, your plates, your resists, everything goes into low slots, conflicting with all your damage mods. Your heat sinks, your tracking enhancers. You have to really juggle what goes where. If I were fitting a Prophecy, I would go for 4 slots for tank, well, 3 plus 1 for damage control if it were PvP, and 2 for damage mods or tracking enhancers. Yes, Tanith, they are very easy to get into with low skills. And it tanks like a charm for its size. I've heard reports of it having like a battleship level tank. That's quite possible. The other problem, and I've seen Shori Leia in chat here, she will probably hate my guts for this, no weapon damage bonus. So, what do? You take a look at lasers, okay, it's got capacitor bonus, but no damage bonus. So, lasers are going to do the same damage on this guy as they would on a Myrmidon. The reason I mention the Myrmidon is because it has no weapon bonuses at all. So what can you do? You can put lasers on it if all your training is in lasers or you have really good laser skills. You can put autocannons on it. You can put blasters on it, actually. You can put autocannons or artillery on it because those don't require capacitor to use and they are easier. Arguably, the capacitor bonus is useful if you're using lasers. Its actual utility is debatable, but let's not get into that here. It can be useful, but the lack of a damage mod means that a lot of people are likely to fit non-standard weapons for it. In this case, autocannons. They don't use capacitor. They're easier to fit. The Prophecy actually has a lot of fitting issues if you put plates on it. They take up a lot of grid. They take up a bit of CPU as well. You want easy-to-fit weapons. As a result, its potential DPS leaves a little bit to be desired. It's also got a very small drone bay. I know people are mentioning drones and hearting them, but really 25 meters cubed bandwidth, 25 meters cubed drone bay. You can fit 5 light drones or 5 ECM drones in there. It's not fantastic. To summarize, it's not recommended in PvE. For another 6 hours or so training, you can get into a Harbinger and burn things. In PvP, you might want to look at Aswell's blog. I've summarized as best I can here. It's best used in a gang. It's not very well suited to solo work, in my opinion. It's best used in like a small gang where you can just bomb around with a couple of mates and wreck things. You can use it as a bait ship, as I think someone said. Hang on. Michael says power grid output 1300 megawatts, CPU output 350 teraflops. Yes. However, a 1600mm plate takes up 500 of those 1300 megawatts. It needs more megawatts, ladies and gentlemen. So it can fit a tank, it can fit a good tank, but it's not going to have a lot of grid left for weaponry or other stuff. What do you put in its utility high? Well, you can put Cap War in there. You can actually turn a Prophecy into a proper full Cap War ship if you are okay with skimping on your tank a bit. You can fit a Warfare Link in there. Yeah, Tanith says it's a shame it doesn't have a NOS range bonus. I agree, but then we'd be getting into a Battlecruiser-sized version of a curse, and we don't want Battlecruiser-sized versions of curses knocking around. Curses are bad enough when they're small. Let's go back to the bait ship thing a second. What do we mean by a bait ship? Sorry, we are going to overrun here a bit. A lot, actually. What do I mean a bait ship? Something that looks like something easy to kill. Yes, that is what a Prophecy can be. You can load it up with a load of armor stuff, get its EHP very, very high, send it out into unknown space, get the attention of a bunch of guys with it, get someone to attack it, survive for a bit while you're in it, and get your mates to all jump in and wreck whatever's attacking you. Malik Yanumano says, a ship to draw in aggressors and survive long enough for friendlies to come to aid and pounce. Yes, that pretty much summarizes the whole bait ship aspect. Why don't I recommend using a Prophecy of the bait ship, though? Yes, it's slow, it's a Mar. Actually, I've seen some pretty good Mar baits, but no, that is one reason. Exactly, Salamander. It is obvious. When people see a Prophecy, they immediately recognize it as having a pretty solid armor tank. And people are going to look at that and think, okay, do I really want to engage that? No, I don't. So if you use a Prophecy in that respect, in that role, you're going to have to look out for someone who is just looking for an easy kill. If any PvP pros are in here wanting to correct me on that, please feel free. But personally, I would not attack a Prophecy if I saw it sitting alone in a belt somewhere. I would not attack it because I'd know they've got friends somewhere else. Moving up the chain from the Prophecy, we actually get to the ship that got me into Battlecruiser hulls in the first place. I said they're my favourite ships in the game. This ship got me into them, the Harbinger. And yes, you can lol at me for now being an Amar lover. Thank you, Shorit. Take a look at that. It's got 846 slots, better layout than the Prophecy, better grid than the Prophecy. Thank you, E-UNI. You have now done enough for the whole class. Yeah, better layout, better grid, better CPU, slightly better CPU. CPU doesn't really scale too highly. What are its bonuses? Bonuses are to laser cap use and, more importantly, laser damage. There's going to be no argument about what to fit on here, ladies and gentlemen. You want to fit the biggest, baddest lasers you can possibly fit onto that thing. And also, it looks cool. At least I think so, anyway. Unlike the Prophecy, the bonus to damage means you can actually get a lot of DPS out of it. It's got 7 turrets, so you can fit 7 pulse lasers. Used to be before you had the where you put your gun in your high slot determines where it is on the ship. Before you had that, you used to fit 7 pulse lasers onto the Harbinger, and you'd have one stupid little gun under the left side of its chin, not looking symmetrical at all. That used to look pretty silly, but it was undeniably very effective. Zine says, I can't help but think it looks silly with a beak. Yeah, but that's the point. they're sort of supposed to have beaks. The Prophecy looks like a golden chicken. The Harbinger, I don't know what it looks like, but it's got some sort of beak on there. Keep in mind they're slightly based on the old Roman Empire, with elements of old Persians in there as well. Bird stuff does sort of feature fairly highly in old world empires. Yes, turkey ships with codpiece shapes. Ew. You actually look for that sort of thing? We're getting off track here. Unlike the Prophecy, it's got very good DPS on it. It's also got a very good armor tank just right out the box. You take a look at its armor, it's very high. With skills, with the hull upgrade skill, which I think Salaman still only has to 4, shame on you, it gets very high indeed. With plates, even better. Azrael's blog mentions shield tanking a Harbinger. That's not something I would do, but it's actually got the same slot layout as the Hurricane. I'll come back to that when I mention the passive cane later. It's got lots of grid, as I said. It needs that grid for its lasers and its tank. For most scenarios where you'd use a Harbinger, I would recommend using pulse lasers. Why? Well, can someone tell me some benefits about pulse lasers? Actually, I'm going to pick on someone here. Shori, tell me about pulse lasers. Kelson mentioned Scorch. Nah. Just a little bit advanced for something a 2-month-old character might be fine with. Okay, maybe the picking on people thing isn't going to work. Oh yeah, maybe it is. Great Optimal Instant Ammo Switch. Yeah, applies more to beams than Great Optimal, but as short range guns go, it's pretty good. At medium ranges, say 10-15 kilometers or so, you are going to break things, burn things down. Yeah, okay, Salamander should be a bit more specific, shouldn't I? Damage on lasers is actually the same whether you're using pulse lasers or beam lasers. That's damage per hit. Rate of fire means pulse lasers have a lot higher DPS. The other reason I recommend them is that you can just use an afterburner, just one afterburner, and, well, you wouldn't use 2 afterburners, would you? Just a single afterburner, zipping around in the middle of a mission pocket or at mid-range in a fleet encounter, burning things a bit further up, and their short-range weapons can get to you. And you don't need to worry about having long-range weapons like beams. Which, if you look at your average beam laser, I'm not linking that now. It's got very high grid requirement. You can use that extra grid to put an extra plate on your ship. Something else I love about the Harbinger for PvE is its drone bay. Take a look at the drone bay. It's got 50 meters cubed in there. Outside of Galente ships, that's the highest drone bay you can get on a battlecruiser. In PvE, you can put that to very, very good use, alongside having 7 damage bonus lasers. You can sort of make up for having a slightly smaller resist set. The Prophecy has a good resist set right off the bat, but Harbinger doesn't. You can make up for that with sheer damage output. I've got here describe example PvE fit, so I'm going to, because I didn't get around to saving one, or did I? Let me just check that. Let's see here. Browse, Battlecruiser. Oh, I did save 2. It'll come here eventually. Yeah, take a look at that. If that's the fit I'm thinking of, then it's a pretty good fit for PvE. You'll notice it's got an afterburner on there, so you can zip around and use the pulse lasers, no problem. If you didn't have an afterburner on there, you'd be stuck with beams and possibly have fitting issues. If you want to say that, please do. I forgot who I got it from, but I'm pretty sure it was female, and she will probably kill me for giving it out so readily. But that doesn't matter. Apple clones. We have reserves. For PvP, I've got another fit here. There we go. The second fit I've linked is for PvP, and it's actually shield tanked. Slightly. What I mean by passive cane, I'm going to go on to this now because I forgot this was shield tanked. What I mean by a passive cane when you're looking at a hurricane, in this case a passive harbinger, you ignore the fact that it's usually armor tanked. You just completely ignore the low slots. We've got another fit here from Athanor Ruthorn. Let me just take a look at that. Yeah, that is an average passive cane. That is well, not an average passive cane. It's a pretty good passive cane, but it's what you'd look for in a passive cane. Why is it usually armor tanked? Salamand asks. Because it has 6 low slots and only 4 mids. And most people have armor skills if they're flying MR. What you do with a passive Harvey, in this case, was going to say passive cane, but passive Harvey works as well. Use your mids for shield stuff and fill your lows up with damage mods. In the example Harbinger I gave you, you've got 3 heat sinks. That's more than you'd normally fit onto an armor tanked Harbinger. So you can ignore the fact that you're usually armor bonused. Well, not armor bonus in this case, you're usually armor tanked. Rely on shields that are usually paper thin, but they're not paper thin in this case. You've got the large shield extender there. You don't have to be slowed down by plate, and your weapons do more damage and more DPS because you've got the 3 heat sinks there. The tracking enhancer, I don't know what it's doing there. I'd possibly use another heat sink. 4 is about the limit I'd put on stacking penalty modules though. And the dog started barking again. Yeah, Tanith raises a good point. For a fit like that, where you'd want to rely on speed, where you'd want to use speed more, you would need to use the short range, or in this case medium range guns, to complement that. You wouldn't want to start zipping around at high speeds with a beam fit, because what would be the point in that? You're already out of range. You don't need to get into range to fire them so readily. And no, that is not as efficient as... Well, not as efficient, say, for a newer T1 Pulse fit, I'm going to quote you there. No, and I wouldn't recommend the passive Harvey fit to a newer pilot, but apparently it can get really devastating results with more experienced pilots, more skill points under your belt. However, if you do want passive shield stuff, let us move on to the Caldari, although I've just noticed something down here at the bottom of my Harbinger notes. Has anybody seen Setup recently? Nobody's seen Setup recently. Okay, well I was going to try and get a hold of him. He's apparently got a triple-plated, triple tri-marked Harbinger. But I didn't ask him to share because I was a bit busy at the time, but no, Setab, he's a player that hangs around chat.E-UNI every so often. I'll try and link him in lecture.E-UNI chat now. I think that's him. Yeah, it probably does move at like 2 meters a second. Yeah, triple tri-marked, triple plated Harbinger. I cannot think for the life of me how to replicate that, but apparently he has one. And apparently it's pretty good if you're going specifically for buffer. And yes, it does sound like a fantastic bait ship, because people look at a Harbinger, they think, okay, it's not a prophecy, it doesn't have a resist bonus on it, let's blow it up. And then they hit all that buffer. Actually, I wonder if you'd use 800 plates, because fitting 3 1600 plates would chew up all his power grid. Anyway, moving on, that's a digression, and we're already overrunning. I didn't plan to overrun, but it doesn't matter. There's nothing after this anyway. Let's move on. If you want passive shield, look no further than the Caldari. And the first of the Caldari ships I'll talk about is the Ferox. It's not very highly regarded. I'll explain why in a minute. Thank you, Shori, for linking it. As you can see, the Ferox is actually symmetrical for a Caldari ship. That's quite an achievement. They're not usually the masters of symmetry. It's got a 754 slot layout, and it has bonuses to hybrid range. That's part of why it's unpopular. You'll have to excuse me a second. No, the dog is mimetised. I'll probably shut up when I mention the Cyclone. Anyway, the Ferox's bonuses are also hybrid range and shield resist. The shield resists are the same as on the Drake. The hybrid range bonus It's part of why the Ferox is not very popular. Put simply, hybrids are crap. Let me explain what I mean by that. At the beginning of the game, towards the beginning of the game, hybrids were great. Galente were among top tier PvPers more or less all the time. Other guns got buffs, and hybrids failed to keep up. At the moment, they deal either high damage at knife fight range, or very, very low tickle-like damage at some medium-long ranges. Okay, fine, sorry. As a result of having the hybrid bonuses, and most Caldari pilots don't have hybrid skills, or very high hybrid skills, it's considered to be not as good as the Drake. Rightly so. That's not to say it's completely useless, however. As Battlecruisers go, it's pretty cheap. Let me get a market for a second. Malik says, so hybrids aren't really good for short range. No, they're good for short range if you can use blasters well, if you know how to use blasters properly. I'll get onto that when I talk about the Brutix. Hybrids, if you are really good at using them, can also be used for sniping. If you use railguns, sure, your damage won't be so great, your DPS will be very low, but you can hit things from about 250 kilometers away. If you're using the right ship. Where was I? Okay, so market order in the Sinklason region, which is where I'm currently docked up, for a Ferox is 17 million ISK. That's, as Battlecruisers go, that is among the cheapest. Let me get up similar things for the Prophecy, a lot more expensive at, well, not a lot more expensive at 18. The Brutix comes in at 21, and the Cyclone... Okay, the Cyclone is probably the cheapest, but as Battlecruisers go, the Ferox is very cheap. It's disposable, you can use it as training wheels for a Drake or for one of the command ships, get onto those later. It's cheap, can be cheerful, usually cheap and nasty, can be very cheap and cheerful. Reason I say training wheels for a Drake, if you want to fly a Drake, but you don't have the ISK for it, you can fit a shield tank onto the Ferox and simulate a Drake without actually being in a Drake. Yeah, I'll get onto the weapons now, actually. I've got a fit by Toxic Quantum. He's on the chat.E-UNI fairly regularly. And he really hates the Drake. A couple of other people do as well, but I'm not those other people. And Tox is not those other people either, he is Tox. And he's got a good Ferox fit that I'm going to share with you. Leonidas Tokugawa says, lol, I fly Drake and Ferox. Yeah, okay. I'm not saying you have to fly just the one ship. What I've linked for you there is Tox's PvP Ferox. As you can see, he's fit blasters to it. He's making use of the ship bonuses. You can actually get pretty decent range out of blasters on a Ferox. Yeah, okay, they're still blasters though. Due to its low damage and the fact that you need a lot of skills and effort to get decent damage out of it, I don't recommend it for a lot of uses, especially in PvE. It's another 6 hours to the Drake. Deal with it. PvP, as you can see there, it can do fairly well. With blasters, it can do surprising damage. Yeah, blasters can do damage. Autocannons, I've heard things about this. It does about as well as an autocannon Prophecy would without having to worry about the low slots. No, the dog is not eating me. Not that great. Okay, going back to the Prophecy a second, you can get pretty good results out of it with autocannons, gyrostabs, short-range ammo. This is the same thing with the Drake. You can use its low slots all for mag stabs, gyrostabs even, and load up with autocannons, short-range ammo, deal some pretty decent damage. Most Caldari pilots using a Ferox will probably have missile skills though. And I don't recommend the Ferox as a missile ship, it's a bit crap. One thing you can do, I've had a lot of things you can do with the Ferox. One thing you can do, people underestimate it. People might therefore be tempted to go and gank it, so it can be used as bait. Which ties into its next role, surprise heavy tackle. Normally when you think of tackle, you think of, yes, Salamand, they're going to have a health warning on this thing. I babble a lot. When people think of tackle, they think of frigates. Okay, that is fine. They might think of interdictors or heavy interdictors in null. That is also fine. What people don't really realise with the Ferox, it's got a pretty decent buffer shield tank, and it can use mid-slots going spare to fit a long point. So, or even 2 long points. So if it gets attacked as a bait ship, it can hold a couple of things down, survive long enough for the rest of the fleet to get there, and even the odds. During which time it's already made enough of a nuisance of itself and done its job. The other thing that I found out about Kion, can you not key up, please? Unless you've got something you want to say, in which case feel free to ask me. Okay? The other thing that I found out about the Ferox is that for a Tier 1 Tech 1 battlecruiser, it's got a nice amount of CPU on it. Which means that you can potentially do atrocities like what I'm linking now. Ghetto Orca. What do I mean by Ghetto Orca? Well, most people will know what an Orca is, right? Except if you can name a quality of an Orca. Aside from Hauler. Yeah, okay, Corp Hanger. But the one I'm looking for, as Tanis points out, is mining bonuses. What I did with this Ferox, in a fit of stupidity apparently, is turned it into a mini version of an Orca for people that don't have Orcas yet. I'll describe it for people who might be listening to the recording a bit later and can't see the chat. It's got a load of mining stuff in the high slots and some cargo stuff in the lows. It's very tight on CPU anyway. I had to fit a coprocessor to make it work, but most people don't use it for combat stuff, and it's cheap, so I figured, why the hell not? And it can fit a mining link, because it's got the 99% reduction to all warfare links that all battlecruisers have, so it can do a lot of decent mining gang support, or small gang support anyway. Xeno says ratting Orca is pro. Yeah, so while your Orca is off ratting, why not use a Ferox to actually do the job? Tannet says, could it fit a cloak for nullsec mining ops as well? I would leave that to a Hurricane, actually. The reason I'd leave that to a Hurricane is because it's for the simple reason that it's got 2 utility highs, rather than just the 1. With this thing you can fit all the highs with either minor 2s or the... I've used the laser optimization link to speed up laser cycle time, which is probably the most useful out of the 3, although the range one is quite good as well. Sometimes you see battlecruisers, you think, okay, this can do a lot of things, and, well, this is one of those lots of things that isn't quite so obvious. And it says, be a non-standard quicker line sneaky mining op. Exactly. However, if you wanted to do that, you could just very easily have the Ferox or your booster off-grid. Because I think it's system-wide and you don't have to actually be present to give out the bonuses. You have to be in system, admittedly, but you don't have to be right there and there. Moving on to something that has a more obvious application, and I think someone linked a bit further up, the Drake. And now I'm just waiting for Don Carnage or a Drake hater to come in and say, Drake's 101. Yes, this is probably what this class ends up turning into. They are arguably the most common PvE battlecruiser the most popular ones. Also extremely common in PvP. Slot layout is 864. Their bonuses, as you can see, are 2 missile damage, 5% bonus kinetic damage of heavy missiles and heavy assault missiles per level, and the 5% shield resistance that the Ferox also shares. As a result of having that 6th mid slot over the Ferox and having a higher base HP, it can field pretty much the strongest tank in the Tech 1 Battlecruiser world. Thank you, Michael, for linking its fitting stuff. Strangely enough, although not strangely enough considering it's Caldari, but other battlecruisers use guns. This is not something that is a big secret. Other battlecruisers have more gun slots than they do missile slots. The Drake, I nearly said Ferox there, the Drake is the obvious exception there. It has 7 missile slots, so it can put out very consistent damage at whether it's at 1 kilometer or at 70. And it's got one of the strongest tanks in the battlecruiser world, like I said. Very good resist set. By the time you get into it, you've already got an extra bonus of 10% on top of base resists. Very high basic shield HP. It's not got a fantastic capacitor, so this means it favours a passive shield tank. This is going to be a very basic question, however, I need to ask this for the sake of completion. What do I mean by a passive shield tank? Richie Blackmore says no booster. TG says capless. Michael says you don't have to mind it. Sophia says a shield that repairs itself. Kazad says sake of completion is a math thing. Yes, and my degree is in math, so go figure. What a passive shield tank is a shield tank that 2 plus 2 is not 5. Although here it might well be. What a passive shield tank is a shield tank that repairs itself without any input from you. It takes up most of your mid slots, most of your low slots, with shield extenders, shield resist stuff in the mids, shield power relays in the lows to weaken your capacitor. You don't have much capacitor anyway, so a shield boost will be pretty useless. And sorry. Yeah, you don't have much capacitor, so shield boosters don't mean much. So you don't need that capacitor anyway, so why not use a load of shield power relays? A lot of people do. However, that also means it's very, very, very easy to over-tank that ship. Yeah, Shuri, it does have the stick of a small moon, you're quite correct. Just bringing up my own Drake, for example, it has a signature radius of 404. That's very, very close to battleship levels. As a result of it being passive shield tank, it's more or less unstoppable in PvE. In PvP, okay, it has a lot of tank, can't do much damage, can't do much DPS. For PvE, I'm going to link my own fit that I use. You'll have to excuse the name. What that thing has is a very solid resist set. I think it's got over 65 per resist when everything's active. 12,000 shield HP, I'm rounding down a bit there, and 93 HP per second. I consider that to be over-tanked for an L3 mission. So what could I do? What could I do to improve it? Just for the benefit of people who will be listening to this later, my tank looks like 2 Tier 2 invulnerability fields, 1 meta thermal hardener, 2 large shield extenders, 2 shield power relays, 3 medium core defense field purger rigs. That's my tank. I consider that to be too much. Tanith says put damage modifiers for the missiles. Yes, you could do that. A lot of Drake pilots neglect their DPS. In fact, I've seen a lot of Drake fits that completely ignore ballistic control units in the low slots. Do not ever do that. You need DPS to actually kill ships. You don't need to tank things if they're already dead. Xeno says you could drop a rig for a missile damage bonus rig. Yes, you could do that. A lot of people might be thinking, oh my god, where is my shield going? I've got lower than 90 HP a second regen. That's not a problem. I took this thing into an Angel Extravaganza level 4 earlier. I was helping a friend out because, well, he was a bit silly and took his own Drake in. And this thing was very easily tanking 3 or 4 battleships at a time, plus a load of battlecruisers, plus some hacks, plus yada yada yada, just fine. For the purposes of a level 3 mission, it is way over-tanked, and most Drake pilots make that mistake. General principles for PvE fitting: go with the minimum tank you need, fill the rest up with gank. Let's move on. I could talk about the Drake all day, and I don't want to turn this into Drake's 101. Let's move on to a faction that I think a few more people will want to love or hate more: the Gallenti. My first character was Gallenti. And my first character being Gallenti, my first character used to fly a Brutix. I was very young and very naive back then. As first tier battlecruisers go, the Brutix is potentially the most powerful, just from a low to medium skill point of view, if it can get into range. Slot layout, thank you Shori, is 745. Its bonuses are to medium hybrid turret damage, that's blasters and railguns, and 7.5% bonus to armor repair effectiveness per level. Problem with that second bonus is, well, it doesn't have a capacitor. Okay, it has a capacitor, but it's not very good. I didn't even say the Brutix fit either. Let's talk about the strengths of the Brutix, though, because we've ascertained that it doesn't have a great capacitor if you want to active armor tank it. It looks like a fist. I'm sorry, but it looks very fist-like from here. A fist with a pharaoh beard. Xene, if you have a very good gank Brutix fit, then I think the channel would like to see it. Please. But yes, it looks like a fist with a pharaoh beard. It flies like a fist. It's probably the simplest of the battlecruisers to use for exactly the same reason that thoraxes are also very simple. Tackle frigates are also very simple. They are one-track frigate. They are one-track mines. Why did I say frigates there? Oh, you even called it fist gank. Lovely. The point of the Brutix is to get into range very quickly and shred things with blasters. I'm sorry, but if you try to fit railguns on it, you're not going to do very well. You're going to have the same range with antimatter that a pulse laser might have with Scorch. And Scorch is actually very good. Yeah, Xene points out it runs out of capacitor fast. This is why I mentioned the capacitor earlier, guys. And you have to blaster something down fast. That's okay, because blasters have a very high damage output. If you can tackle it reliably and get into range and shred things, then you've won. Your Brutix has done its job, you can go home, and your opponent has a wreck to console himself. Most people won't let you get into range, though. Let's just skip over this PvE thing. I said PvE not recommended there for the same reason that I don't recommend a Ferrex for PvE. PvP, well, like we've been saying, it's a fist. Most people don't like fist fights. They want to shoot you. And that generally means they want to keep their range a little bit more. And unfortunately, that's what the Brutix doesn't like. It doesn't like people keeping range from it. It doesn't like people running away from it. But when it does catch up to them, Xene says it can do around 800 DPS. If you can get that close. And the problem with the armor repair bonus it has, aside from running out of captive quickly, it also makes people think it should be armor tanked all the time. And what does armor do? Slows you down. So you have a very slow flying fist. It doesn't have a range bonus like the Ferox does, so it can't make up for that with just shooting from further away. You do lower damage. So what you could do with that to overcome that is to use either a glass cannon setup or a shield fit. The glass cannon setup is one that ignores its tank entirely. It's got pretty decent armor buffer, just as basic, but what you want to do is fill up the low slots with nanofiber internal structures or overdrive injectors, and fit a micro warp drive and some tackle stuff in the mids. That way, you don't have to worry about getting into range. The problem there, though, well, glass cannon. If something so much as sneezes on you, you're dead. Which is where the shield fit comes in. Shield tank on a Brutix seems a little counterintuitive, but you've got 4 mids, 5 lows. You don't have enough lows to fit a decent armor tank, as well as a load of damage mods. So what you can do, stuff the lows full of damage mods and nano, stuff the mids full of shield tank, go to town. Very, very simple ship. One other thing you could do with it is an autocannon fit. I've never tried that. Has anybody ever tried using an autocannon fit on a Brutix? Sorry, I've just been distracted by a question here. Finns Kayara says, so is it common to use Brutix in PvE? No. The reason for that is because its bigger cousin, the Myrmidon, is better. Let's take a look at the Myrmidon for a second. Thank you, Shori. Most people that have seen a Myrmidon ever, well, know that it's a bit weird. It's vertical. It also has a lot of options that you can do with it. It's one of the earliest proper drone boats in the game that you can get into. The Vexor is good, the Arbitrator is great. Yes, it is a boomerang in a way, but when people look at a Myrmidon and look at its bonuses, drone damage, HP, and armor repair amount, they'll notice that it's a drone boat. And in fact, it was the first battlecruiser that I flew, and didn't actually lose in battle. So it has a special place in my heart for that reason. The slot layout is 656. Obviously, it has the least number of high slots as battlecruisers go. 6 is not bad though. But the problem there is that although it's got 6 high slots and more importantly 6 turret slots, it has no weapon bonuses. So what do people do with it? Well, you can do 2 things. You can fit guns on there, they're not bonused, so you won't get such fantastic damage, unless you really go for it with the low slots. Or, in PvP especially, you can use it as a neuting ship. And this is what I think we were talking about earlier with the Prophecy. You can do a Newt Prophecy pretty badly. You can do a Newt Myrmidon pretty badly as well, but you can also do a Newt Myrmidon fairly well. If you take a look on Battle Clinic, I'm not saying anybody should take a look on Battle Clinic right now, but if someone takes a look on Battle Clinic and sees a fit for a Cap War Dommy, you'll notice that the Dommy has only 1 slot difference to the Myrmidon, that being a low slot. And that's not important. So what you can do with a Myrmidon is you can turn it into a Newt ship. And in fact, Xene says triple rep Myrm with Newts, or indeed Vamps, best bait ship. And in fact it does bait very well. This is where the rest of the Myrm's options come in. Especially for PvE, you can armor tank it or shield tank it. The Myrmidon is one of those rare ships that can do both. You can either triple rep it, mostly in PvP though. You only need like 1 or 2 reps in PvE with a lot of armor stuff in the lows, or you can do a pretty heavy passive shield fit. I'm not going to go into which one is better, it depends on your skills. Let me link a couple of fits for you. First one I've linked is called Armor Tanked. Obviously, you won't be finding any shields there. The second one I linked, which I borrowed from someone else, is a passive shield fit. It's a very simple passive shield fit, not very much clutter at all. You can see very quickly from there that everything you'd expect out of a passive shield fit is right there. You've got large shield extender 2s in the mids, shield power relays in the lows, and some weapons that don't use capacitor. This is quite important for a Myrmidon. You want everything, you want all your capacitor to go into your tank or possibly Cap War. It doesn't have any weapon bonuses. You could argue drones are weapons, but not onboard weapon bonuses. So you don't want weapons that use capacitor. That leads to a lot of people using autocannons or artillery. Keep in mind though that most of a Myrmidon's danger is from its drones. You can do more or less anything to the Myrmidon and its drones will just keep on going. You can mute it to hell, you can put tracking disruptors on it, you can throw 30 ECM ships at it, and its drones will just keep on going because it doesn't have to control them once they're launched. Okay, it does, but if they're aggressive and they're on you and you ECM the Myrm, it doesn't stop doing damage. This makes it very, very dangerous. And in fact, the Myrm is one of the very few non-Caldari ships that can make use of ECM. In this case, ECM drones, which come in 3 sizes: small, medium, large. Myrmidon can use all 3 sizes. Makes it a very, very dangerous opponent, no matter what size of ship you're flying. If you're flying a battleship and you see large ECM drones on the horizon, you better run. Being as it's a drone boat, however, I mean, it's very vulnerable for one reason. You can blow up drones. Once all the drones are out, then a Myrmidon just becomes a very, very weak ship in general. Which is why you'd want to use it with caution, no matter where you fly it. It's probably one of the most micromanagement intensive ships that a 2-month-old pilot would look at. But that's not a bad thing. Because if you're very careful, and you're very good at being careful with drones, then you could fly a really good Dominix, you could fly a really good Ishtar, you could even consider it in a way as training wheels for a carrier if you want to go down that route. I wouldn't, personally, because I stay out of big nullsec or lowsec politics stuff that would need caps, but you may want to go down that route. I don't know. I'm not you, so I can't answer that for you. Moving on down the list, we're nearly done. I'm sorry for taking more time than I said I would. We get onto the Minmatar ships at last, and now my dog has finally stopped barking. Peace at last. We need to do 2 more ships, the Cyclone and the Hurricane. You start with the Cyclone, because that comes first. Yeah, the dog is probably sleeping. One thing to note about both Minmatar Battlecruisers, I can cover them both at once actually. They are very, very similar to one another. By that I mean that the Cyclone and the Hurricane both fill very similar roles. Both of them can wade into combat and break stuff, and they've got very similar ship bonuses in a way. Very similar bonuses, very similar usage, and anything the Cyclone can do, the Hurricane can probably do better, or as well. In that respect, the Cyclone is underrated. I noticed earlier that in the regional market for St. Layson, the Cyclone was the cheapest battlecruiser hull. That's probably true for a lot of other regions as well. Check it in Metropolis or Heimatar for me, please. We're getting 17 million Cyclones in... What region are you in, Zeril? Okay, so 17 million in Metropolis at the time of this class. Very cheap, because people don't like it so much. Let's focus on the Cyclone for a moment. 854 layout. Its bonuses are to projectile rate of fire, which is very good, and shield boosting, which makes it the only battlecruiser that can really, really pull off a solid active shield tank. I've got a decent shield tank fit somewhere. Let me find that. Yeah, I stole this from Battle Clinic and upgraded it. It's called Low SP Cap Stable, which is a lie because I found out that With an all 5 skills profile, it comes out as 9 minutes of cap life. Most of the time you wouldn't need to bother with that, because in a mission, you only need 9 minutes of cap anyway. You don't even need that. By active shield tank as opposed to passive one, I mean that it has a shield booster. That's really the main difference. It doesn't rely on its own regeneration, it has a module to do that for you. The problem with the Cyclone is that it shares similarities with the Hurricane, whose bonuses are a lot meaner. They're both to weapons. In this case, projectile rate of fire and projectile damage is very much like the Harbinger in that regard. Oddly enough, as well, in his blog, says that in Battlecruiser duels, a well-fitted Cyclone can actually take down a Hurricane. I don't know how. It's possible, as well says so, but well, both ships fill very similar roles. They're both pretty decent matches for one another, regardless of whether or not the Hurricane does things better. Let's take a look at the Hurricane. I've got a fit here. I don't remember where this Hurricane fit came from, but as you can see, hang on a second. Shori says the Cyclone can probably tank a lot as long as you have cap boosters. That is true, and especially with an oversized shield booster. The one I've got in the fit I linked was a medium. If you use a large, you'd need a cap booster to make up for it, but it can tank for a long time. And Cassandra links a passive Hurricane, which for some reason is not working for me. A lot of people really swear by Hurricanes. I think they're the most dangerous battle cruisers in a brawl, by far. 846 layout, bonuses to rate of fire and damage from projectiles. Other races' battle cruisers have differences, quite pronounced differences. In this case, Hurricanes are just a very logical step up from the Cyclone, because they do the same things. It can put out DPS very well. It can tank fairly hard, not as well as a Drake can, obviously. One thing going in its favour, and Star Wars fans will rejoice at this, it looks like a Star Destroyer. Seeing as it's very similar to the Cyclone, it can do PvE just as well. I noticed it has a lot of trouble with a lazy or sloppy fit that doesn't have a Tech 2 tank. Probably suffers from that more than with other battle cruisers because it doesn't have such a strong tank anyway. That's not to say it has a bad tank, I'm just saying that it has a weaker tank than, for example, a Harbinger. But it is more threatening. In PvP especially, you're likely to fit 6 autocannons and a load of gyrostabs in lows. Yeah, Salaman says it's a skinny Star Destroyer, like a Star Destroyer light, Diet Star Destroyer. It's like Diet Dr. Pepper, but doesn't taste nice. Yeah, very high damage potential with either the Cyclone or the Hurricane. I was going to say Myrmidon there for some reason. Why was I going to say that? You'll notice, however, that the Hurricane has 6 guns. And that leaves 2 high slots not doing very much. In the Cyclone, it's got a split weapon system, but you can fill 3 high slots with launchers. Or, if you're clever and you use command processors, you could use the Cyclone as like a training wheels version of a Claymore. You can't do that so much with a Hurricane unless you want to really lower your damage. But it's got 2 high slots. What can you do with them? Well, Catwall. We mentioned earlier, however, that you could use 1 high slot for a cloak, one for a gang link. Who wasn't that mentioned that, by the way? Okay, we're getting off topic with some stuff in channel about the Executioner frigate looking like a pod racer. It's true, but it doesn't help us here. Like I mentioned with the Harbinger when I didn't really want to bring this up just yet, there's armor canes versus passive canes. Armor cane obviously being armor tank, passive cane being passive shield tanked. The comparison is a lot closer here than it would be with, for example, the Myrmidon, where, depending on your skills, armor or shield can pull ahead, but at high levels, passive shield Myrmidon will tank harder. For a Hurricane, it's not quite so cut and dried. And ultimately, it really does boil down to either personal preference or to skills at the end of the day. You can use a passive cane very nicely in PvP because you don't have to worry so much about your capacity. So you can get into range with the micro warp drive, turn it off, and suddenly you no longer need capacitor. You don't need that so much with an armor cane. But depending on where you mission with your armor cane, well, or do anything with armor cane actually, you could do some pretty decent small armor gang stuff if you had a couple of mates in armor canes and one guy in an Oneros. You could do some pretty nice stuff with an armor cane. You can stuff some mid slots for the E-War or whatever, really. Hang on, we've now got a T2 passive shield tank that's working. Thank you very much, Salamand. We've covered some general stuff about Battlecruisers. We've covered all 8 different Battlecruisers. Much as we covered the Cyclone and the Hurricane together, we've still covered all 8 ships. Just want to round off now with a discussion on what happens when you go past Battlecruisers. Well, you can move on to hacks, you can move on to battleships. Battlecruisers have a Tech 2 version called the Command Ship, however, and I want to talk about those for just a second. Just a question for any old veterans that happen to be in this channel. When were command ships introduced to the game? Does anybody know? Because I certainly don't know. Okay, we don't have an answer. That one can just be chalked up to the mist of time. Anzarel says, at a guess, around Dominion. No idea. Yeah, the point is that Tech 2 battlecruisers are all based on Tier 1 Tech 1 hulls. So the Galenti command ships are based on the Brutix, the Minmatar one's based on the Cyclone. And the reason I'm asking is because I don't know if Tier 2 hulls, the Hurricane, Drake, Myrmidon, and Harbinger, I don't know if they've been released then. They probably had, but I don't know when they came in. Anyway, it can be left another time. 2 types of battlecruisers that you might need to know about: Field Command and Fleet Command. Now, Field Command ships are the Absolution, Nighthawk, Astarte, and Sleipnir. I'm not asking anybody to link those because that would be pointless. Those ones, if you're ever in a fleet with those, are the damage dealers. Yes, thank you, Anzarel. They share similarities with their Tech 1 counterparts, in a way. Nighthawk behaves like a Drake. It spits missiles and rolls off the pawns. Thank you, Anzarel. The others behave more like their other Tier 1 counterparts. In that the Absolution is a laser boat that looks like a prophecy, tanks like a beast, and can deal lots of damage. More damage than a Tech 1 battlecruiser ever could. They are lead from the front brawlers. They are, well, they're command ships in the sense that they get stuck in, they lead by example, they pwn things. The fleet command ships, on the other hand, the Damnation, the Vulture, the Eos, and the Claymore, they tank harder, they lead from the back though. They don't have so much DPS because they can fit 3 links as standard. I mentioned something called a command processor earlier. I don't know if I got the name right, but it lets you fit an extra warfare link. Think of fleet command ships as having 2 of those built into the hull. And in fact, a couple of the anti-piracy runs I've been on, we have a Vulture with us. We have a fleet commander in a Vulture, shining out with shield links everywhere, and well, a lot of people don't like him for that. but I think it's good. There are some very passing similarities between the Fleet Command ships and their Tech 1 counterparts. Some of them are very strange indeed, though. The Damnation, for example, is a cannon ship. It's just weird. It uses missiles, for God's sake. Why would a Mars ship use missiles? But the point is, they use links. They use the warfare links that I mentioned earlier, which are awesome. They all get bonuses to different types of links. For example, the Claymore. Can someone link the Claymore for me? Because I'm lazy. Thank you. As you can see, the bonus right down the very bottom of the list is, well, just up from that. 3% bonus to effectiveness of skirmish warfare links per level. That's on the Claymore. Other ships get bonuses like it. What that means is that when you use a warfare link, it's better than if it was on another ship. If you want to use warfare links on a ship that isn't a command ship, obviously Tech 1 Battlecruisers are fine. You can consider Tech 1 Battlecruisers. In fact, the Cyclone I mentioned earlier has 3 high slots that aren't being occupied by autocannons. You can, if you're so inclined, use Tech 1 Battlecruisers as testing beds for Fleet Command ships if you are currently too cheap to get into one or you don't have the skills for one. They were really designed with the Fleet Command or Wing Commander positions in mind, but if you have a glut of Fleet Command ships for some reason, you could probably press one into service as Squad Commander. I wouldn't recommend that, though. They're too valuable to be wasted like that. I forgot if there was anything else I was going to say. My notes stopped there. So if anybody has questions, then now is the time to ask them. I'm sorry that I overran by an hour.
Did you ever encounter command ship gangs?
Command ship gangs I've never encountered, but then again I don't really go into low sec too often. We did miss out on an Astarte kill last week, but I think I've only ever seen one other field command ship, and the only fleet command ships that I've ever seen are friendly. That's not to say that they won't ever be used. For example, in null sec you might want a fleet command ship in, well, obviously a command position to make the rest of the fleet that much bigger. Bigger, better, faster, stronger. Keenest Darren says, can you briefly cover skills required to fly a battlecruiser reasonably well beyond just the prerequisites? To be honest, most of that should be covered in either the tanking skills, the skills you need to operate your tank, your Tech 2 tank, or weapon upgrades or advanced weapon upgrades. I recommend advanced weapon upgrades to 4. Your methods may vary. One thing I would recommend to every battlecruiser pilot ever is capacitor skills. Things like energy management, energy systems operation. Your capacitor is your life. There is a lecture in the class library called Cap is Life, I think, and at least I think it's in the library. I think. Don't quote me on that.
It is.
Thank you. Yeah. If you want to know more about why capacitor is useful, go there. All I will say here is that if you can't run your modules or your guns, you can't fire your guns, you can't run your tank, then you are dead in the water. Thank you, Richie. Command ships were introduced in Exodus Red Moon Rising. I don't know when the second tier Tech 1 Battlecruiser were released, possibly later, but 2005 was when the command ships came in. Which is probably why they're all based on the first tier Battlecruiser hulls. And yes, Anzerol points out that if you have a buffer tank, then you don't need to worry so much about Cat War. Myrmidons, Drakes. Anything else? Okay, Cassandra Blackmore mentions that, hang on a second, the linked passive Hurricane can run Cat +2 without too much trouble, although a lack of invulnerability fields does hurt a bit. Yeah, I can see why that needs bringing up. Basically, if you're a capitalist, you need to have a lot of confidence in weapons that don't require capacitor, for example, autocannons, missiles, drones, and a tank that doesn't need too much maintenance. On a passive Hurricane or passive Harbinger, you're running a much greater risk because your tank is much smaller than on a Drake or a Myrmidon. We've, oddly enough, got a killboard link from a command ship gang. Thank you, Shuri. I'll take a look at that. Oh wow, that is frightening. How many battleships did you lose? 8. My God, that is. Okay, absolutions are pretty devastating. Let me just say that now. Absolutions, don't go near them. If they're your enemy, don't go near them. If they're friendly, then they're fine. But if they are hostile, run away. Oh, and there is one stabber down there. I wonder what he was doing. They had a bunch of guardians that don't appear there, of course. Well, I suppose they wouldn't really. Guardians don't really shoot things. Yeah, command ship even gangs are horrific. I wonder where their fleet command ship was. They had loads of field commands on the ship, on the fleet even. Unless the T3s were using warfare processors. Any further questions, or do you need me to cover the skills a bit further? Because I did get a bit distracted there by the killboard. Any more questions? Are there pirate faction battlecruisers? They do appear in the game files somewhere, but unfortunately not. Which is a shame, actually, because, has anybody ever flown into a Blood Raiders mission and seen that awesome-looking Blood Raider prophecy that shows up? Yes, want. Yes, Angel battlecruisers would be so nice, but unfortunately they're just palette-swapped Cyclones. And when you actually look at them in-game, they're a little bit ugly. But, the Blood Raider Vulture... No, Blood Raider Prophecy even looks quite nice. Why am I saying Vulture? Blood Raider Prophecy looks nice. Serpentis Brutix looks nice. Xene says, I want a Pirate Merm. So do I, my friend, so do I, but CCP are not giving them to us. Anzarel says, I want a T2 Merm. The EOS is sort of like that, but I don't recommend the EOS for the simple reason that if you want it just for the drones, you can get the same thing out of an Ishtar. All about the drones, man, he says. Well, yeah. If it is all about the drones, then use an Ishtar. The smaller, they can tank faster. They can tank... Well, yes, they can tank faster, actually. They can be speed tanked. They can tank harder. They have better drones. Somebody's just keyed up there. Do you have a question for me? Okay, well, thank you for your attention. I'm sorry I overran. I get carried away sometimes. I'm going to have to stop this. Hang on. Just a second. Xene says sentries in PvP, what? I honestly thought you were talking about... I honestly thought the Ishtar thing would have been for PvE, because I've never heard of an Ishtar doing PvP. Yeah, I suppose it's possible, though. At any rate, thank you very much for being willing to put up with me for 2 hours, and hope you found it at least a little bit either informative or amusing. Salaman says, how high is Battlecruiser skill worth training? 4 if you don't plan to go for command ships. 5 if you do. The reason I say 4 if you don't want to go for command ships is because it's a rank 6 skill. You spend about a month sitting there for just another level of bonuses, and if you don't want to go for command ships, what's the point? Okay, Xene says, I have Battlecruiser 5 and I love it. Okay, if you really love Battlecruisers, then why not? I want to go for command ships eventually at some point down the line, so I'll be training it to 5-2. The Nighthawk is awesome and sexy. But no, if you don't want to go for command ships or extreme battlecruiser specialization, then you don't need it higher than 4. I suppose if you want to fly Hurricanes and Drakes all the time in PvP even, then they're great to have at 5. But by the time you get around to that month of training, once that finishes, you might be better served flying something shinier anyway. I mean, you could use that month to get into get another racial cruiser up to 4 and fly a pirate faction ship. You could use that month for assault frigates, which, by the way, are sexy and awesome. What a weird note to end it on. Sexy and awesome. Actually, that's how I define battlecruisers. Actually, yeah. Anyway, thank you for putting up with me for 2 hours, and I hope you got something out of this class, even if it was just some lulls. Thank you, and good night.